with it.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of TV Rear View with your host, Matt Squirrel. That's me. Anyway, today we're going to be going over another Amazing Stories episode 16. This one is starring a very familiar face from the thumbnail you can see before you, which is Mr. Mark Hamill. We are going to go over a little bit of who is starring in this episode, but I definitely want to go over the episode itself without any spoilers, as promised as usual. I don't like doing that. So, let's go ahead and move forward in a very fancy way. Ooh, look at that. Okay, so the name of this episode is Gather Ye Acorns. Now, this episode aired on NBC for the first time in February 2nd, 1986. This episode was written by Steven Spielberg, Stu Krager, Joshua Brand, and John Falsey. Now, one of the things I usually do when I look at these episodes, especially, I remember watching this several times because it was included in the Amazing Stories movies, that they did like a compilation of all the different episodes that were either award-winning or were just really well done, with very familiar faces oftentimes. But as far as the series goes, this was aired on regular television. So I looked to see who the director was of this particular episode. And on this episode, we had a very, very familiar name to many people, but not as a director. This is Norman Reynolds. Now, Reynolds would not only direct 2 episodes of Amazing Stories as his special introduction, in a sense, to directing, but he was actually more well known as a production designer. He's worked on such films. Here you see him with George Lucas, because he actually worked on Star Wars New Hope. He worked on Star Wars episode he went from 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars. So he did The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and that's kind of a familiar face. But he also worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas as well, and that came out in 1981. Now, at the time that this episode aired on NBC, this was 1986. So a year later, the film Empire of the Sun would be released, which he also worked on as a production designer. He also worked on Alien 3, The Young Sherlock Holmes. A lot of these names might seem familiar. Some of them may not be to some people, and that's totally fine, but I highly recommend that you check those out. But he did win 2 Academy Awards. Now, he had been nominated 8 times for numerous awards, okay, but he won 2 Academy Awards. One was for 1982 Best Art Direction and Set Decoration of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which he shared with Leslie Dilley and Michael Ford. Then he won for Best Art Direction and Set Decoration in 1978 for Star Wars, and he shared that with John Barry, Leslie Dilley, and Roger Christensen. So I just thought it was a very interesting look at Norman Reynolds, because he has a very familiar face. The name, if it's not the face, one or the other, but it definitely a major asset to all set design and many of the franchises that a lot of us fell in love with as kids and even as adults. So now we're going to move on to the main players of this episode, okay? Like I said before, this is Mark Hamill's character. He plays the role of Jonathan Quick. Okay, now Mark is very much a fan favorite. I can't talk today. You see, this is what happens. But he's a fan favorite. We've seen him in Star Wars. I mean, he's all over the franchise. But not only is he's a seasoned actor and being in different films, and maybe his film career popped around here and there, and he was a familiar face, he more shown behind the scenes. But for a lot of us who appreciate Mark Hamill, we know that he has a lot of history. So let's take a look at that. So from film and television to voice acting as the Joker for the animated Batman series and movies, his career has gleaned numerous nominations and awards and wins over the years. But I wanted to just name a few here because it should be mentioned. So he had a recent win in 2018 from the Behind the Voice Actors Awards. Now, Hamill and others brought home an award for the Best Vocal Ensemble for a TV special / direct-to-DVD title or short, which was Batman the Killing Joke from 2016. And he also had another set of wins in 2017 and 2016 for the regular show for voice acting. In 2013, he also scored a let's see if I can get this correct, several BTVA awards. So that was Best Male Vocal Performances in a Video Game. That was Batman Arkham City. Okay. And he also got the People's Choice Award, Voice Award as well, Best Male Vocal Performance, and all as the Joker in this series. And in 2012, he won again for Arkham City Best Vocal Ensemble, and he shared that with everyone else on the crew there. He also has won Saturn Awards. One was in '81 for The Empire Strikes Back, and then in '84 for The Return of the Jedi. And finally, he did win one BAFTA award in 2012, and he took home that BAFTA for Best Performer for his work as he was in the Batman Arkham City. So that was another Joker win. So his Joker is unmistakable. So yeah, I love Mr. Hamill. I call him Mark, and it was very disrespectful. How dare I? How dare I? We'll move forward. So the next player on this episode is David Rappaport, who plays the role of the Troll. David Rappaport was known for his work in film and in television. Now, some of these titles include Time Bandits, which was a film, a nice throwback, Terry Gilliam project from 1981. He was also, Mr. Rappaport was on The Young Ones, as Shirley in 1982, Captain America, I apologize. Captain Planet and the Planeteers, that TV series. He did the voice of Maul, and he did numerous theater productions and television appearances. Now, the interesting thing is that due to his size, he was often faced with a little bit of a typecasting because they always want to put him inside suits or, just have him in the background. He wanted work where he was in front of the camera. However, this only really fueled his determination to focus on his talent as an actor rather than depend on his physical traits alone. And I did take a small snippet from his actual website, which I will link in the description for his official website. This is the quote, David also made a personal choice to not accept roles that required him to work inside of robots or full-bodied puppet costumes, most notably turning down the role of R2-D2 in Star Wars, a role which later went on to his Time Bandits co-star Kenny Baker. This was a decision David was proud of and never regretted. Sadly, David Rappaport suffered with depression and numerous personal obstacles, and this did lead him to suicide. He had attempted twice before to take his own life. It was upon his third that he was tragically successful. So it's a sad story to know that he was conflicted and he had a lot of stuff going on and just didn't have the support and help that he needed, apparently. But in the same sense, it's a loss. At the time that he died, he was cast a guest star role in Star Trek: The Next Generation in the episode from 1990 called The Most Toys. After a few days of filming, Rappaport attempted suicide over that weekend, and his role was promptly recast with another actor. Rappaport later committed suicide 5 days before that episode even aired. Another interesting comment here is that his death and that of Jack Purvis were the main reasons why Terry Gilliam decided to shelve the intended sequel to Time Bandits from 1981, as their characters were two of the most heavily featured in that film. So, sadly, I really would have loved to see where his career would have taken him, and it's just he was so young, and that's the hardest thing, is that he was only 38. But moving on to our next player in this episode is playing the role of Jonathan's mother, Alma Quick, is the talented Lois De Banzie, a highly regarded, respected actress of stage and theater. She gleaned minor roles throughout her film career and television appearances, but her breakthrough role was on stage. She was Myrtle Brown in Mornings at 7, and it earned her recognition. Her performance won a Drama Desk Award and a Tony nomination. And her face is familiar, and that's the thing. I recall seeing her from television, and she did have appearances on some TV shows here and there. But I remember her from Andy as Mrs. Roosevelt here. She was in Naked Gun, 3½. Leslie Nielsen cracks me up. Okay, and then we have Lois here again on Who's the Boss. So her career spanned different films, minor, more character actor type roles. She was in Addams Family Values. She was in Sister Act, Arachnophobia from 1990. but you could see her. She was on episodes of The Untouchables, the original 1960s Untouchables, The Fugitive, 1950s Perry Mason. A very extraordinary career. I didn't find out a whole lot of information as to her whereabouts today. It doesn't have a date of death, so I hope that she is doing well, and hopefully maybe she'll be picking up small roles here and there. I'd like to see her face again. So our next individual here is I wanted to mention him because he is a notable actor. His name is Dano. He plays Elmer Quick, which is Hamill's father, Jonathan's father, in this episode. Dano is a well-seasoned veteran actor of classic westerns, of television and film. Here he is in The Rifleman. That's a really great still. And his work on a Gary Cooper film, Man of the West. Now, a lot of his roles are minor, but he had notable roles in his career would be from House 2, The Second Story, 1987, and also Something Wicked This Way Comes from 1983. And an additional smaller role, which I couldn't get a screen cap for here, mind you, was from the outlaw Josie Wales, as 10 Spot, 1976, and this is in the same film as Clint Eastwood, that film. Anyway, I will link a great site that will direct you to different projects and career work by Dano that you can check out. He did pass away, but he continues to... It's one of those character actors you see in the background and you don't pay much attention to, but very cool. It's just nice to see a familiar face, isn't it? So the next character, minor role, very minor, it's like a cameo at this point, of Forrest Whitaker towards the end of this episode. He'll pop up around that time. But Forrest Whitaker will go on to be a very well-known actor, director, producer, playing the role of Jerry in this episode. Whitaker won an Academy Award for his performance and as a Ugandan dictator in the film The Last King of Scotland, and that was in 2006. And here in this, if you take a look to the left there, that's James McAvoy. So I always forget that James McAvoy was in this film. I remember seeing this. It was really well done. I highly recommend seeing that. But a lot of people might recognize him for the more recent stuff. So, as an example, he was just in Black Panther as Zuri, and that was 2018. So he's still working, he's still picking up roles, and I like to see him on screen. It's really a nice thing to see. Another role that he took on earlier in his career was in Oliver Stone's Platoon in 1986, Fast Times at Richmond High in 1982, and Jason's Lyric in 1994. That film is a very underrated film from the 90s. And you obviously know more of his recent careers. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight some of our main players in this episode. You might recognize there are a lot of other little familiar faces tucked away, and some you may not recognize, some you might see. But let's go ahead and move into this episode. Now, I will not spoil this episode for those who haven't watched this, because it's the moments of surprise that kind of curb that experience, and even now, it's the magic of re-experiencing this episode that will stick with you. So, Gather Ye Acorns actually addresses childhood in an interesting way, which we will get into as we get along in this. Okay, our story here begins in around 1932, and we're at the home of Jonathan Quick, where his mother is scolding him, okay, as per parents do at times, for listening to the radio and reading comic books and just kind of keeping his heads in the clouds. Now, the mom is also scolding him because he's not looking at his medical book. And that was a book that his father had actually gotten for him. And he kind of refuses to read it. He just wants to be a kid. He feels like he has a lot of pressure on him to be an adult too quickly and to think of his future when all he wants to do is be a child. And I think it's an interesting warning towards parents in a sense, in a very minor way, is not to shove your children into adulthood too quickly. So his mom scolds him, sends him outside, says, here's your medical book that your dad, spent all his money on. Go read this medical book because you're going to be a doctor. So Jonathan goes outside, and as he's daydreaming underneath the tree, this little troll appears. And it's a very interesting little troll because mistakenly you would say, this little troll wakes him up with an acorn because he takes on the manifestation of a squirrel. Not related to me, okay? I don't know many squirrels like this. There's something rabid about this one. But this particular troll says to Jonathan, hey, I noticed that you don't want to be reading that book, and he introduces himself as, quote, the Mother Nature's only son. okay, line, which he will repeat a few times. So the troll is more of a human manifestation of a squirrel that was rambling around in a tree above Jonathan as he dozed off reading the medical journal. There's your summary there, or medical book, rather. So Jonathan starts listening to this troll, and the troll asks him about the book, and knowing that Jonathan has no interest in becoming a doctor, and it's only something that his parents have kind of pushed on him without really asking him what he wanted to be when he grew up. And Jonathan longs to be a child, and rather than an adult that is only interested in the whimsical things of. He wants to be interested in whimsical things in childhood, like comic books, radio shows, cartoons, and his toys. The troll begins to discuss how important it is to hold on to childhood and how materialistic the world had become. Okay. And that's a very interesting thing to kind of, as you're listening to him talk to him. He's saying so much, so you have to keep up with the little words and the phrases that he's using, because he's kind of quirky and squirrely, if you will, not to insult my own kind. So, basically, the troll tells Jonathan to never give up on his things, such as his toys, his childhood items, and his dreams. And he kind of reassures him that the future has plenty to hold for people, that even if they don't want to become a lawyer or a doctor, the most important thing is to have your dreams and your innocence of childhood, and not to forget your childhood, not to let it go and pretend it never existed. So what he does, this troll tells Jonathan all these things, and that one day he could be richer than any doctor or lawyer or businessman he'll meet. And so this intrigues Jonathan really greatly. He could retain his childhood and eventually become quite successful. The troll continues to tell him what to do. Jonathan should get a reliable car that suits his tastes, and then not to throw away any of the things he loves from his room, because, quote, there are treasures galore in there. So soon after, Mother Nature's only son, the troll, okay, leaves Jonathan with his words of wisdom, promising to return one day to check in on him. So we fast forward ahead in time, and this is where we see our young Mark Hamill show up with it. Honestly, that's a pretty hot car, dude. I'm not gonna lie. It's not his Cadillac, was it Corvette Summer? Was that it? That he was in? But this is a really nice looking vehicle. Anyway, so we're fast forwarding in time now. Jonathan has just graduated from high school. He's in the world. He's a young adult, per se. And he spends all of his time working constantly until he gets the vehicle. It's quite apparent that he still believes in the troll's promise, even though as a child something happened like that and nothing had changed over the years. I guess it's that faith in childhood optimism that this kind of reiterates, is having faith in believing in things that may not make sense to anybody else, which, you can contribute to whatever you'd like. So Jonathan finally earns this vehicle, and as soon as he does this, he stops working. I mean, it's all at once. And of course his parents are pretty ticked off. His dad finally has had enough. He's like, you're not going to go to work. And Jonathan's like, nope, not going to go to work. I mean, why? I'm happy the way my life is. And his parents are like, Dad's like, get the hell out. So that's exactly what happens. So we fast forward again in time, and now we're towards the 1950s. And that's where we pick up the story. I don't want to elaborate too much on the story, because I do want you to take a look at this particular clip. But there's numerous aspects to the experiences that Jonathan goes through in his life, and they're certainly not that easy. I believe it's not so much the sacrifices that Jonathan makes by surrendering like a stable life, but rather the promise to preserve his childhood innocence and his childhood and the ability to dream. Now, there is this quote from the troll that's in this episode that I thought, it stuck with me when I was a kid. And I recalled it so vividly because I heard it so many times at the time I had seen this episode. But the quote is, doctors are plenty in this world. What we could very well do with are a few more dreamers. I remember writing that down into a journal I had, and I thought this was the best quote ever, because there's this rush for children to be exposed to this rat race of the world. And there's this need to dash away what we consider childish or whimsical or, quote, magic, right, early in life. And I believe this has gotten worse with time, so every generation sees this happen more and more sooner into their young years. And childhood is this very brief window in retrospect of our entire lives. So when we lose that ability to dream, it really sucks. And things become harder. Now, children often deal with a lot of reality. So examples I would give are a broken home, maybe being homeless, maybe an illness, losing a parent, or simply just being forced to grow up too quickly. Now, the warnings of the troll regarding materialism, greed, and ego, it just kind of ran true to the world that we have had from the beginnings of our lives. Now, not everybody should live like a vagabond, as the main character here does. Now, it's not suited for everybody, nor is it the way of life for many, but those who do choose to live outside of a box are often happier and appreciative of the small things. And I think that's what's interesting about this episode as a whole, is that childhood is a reminder of the simplicity of just being happy with oneself and the world around them. And when we are wrapped up into a rat race or we lose ourselves in day-to-day living, pieces of our wonder disappear with every hardship. We start to get kind of hardened towards the world, and we get hardened towards other people. We are less likely to think from the perspectives of children. And I think that's what this episode, in a roundabout way, discusses, is to preserve the innocence and the wonder of being a child. And the dreamer isn't all as terrible as it sounds, if we remain dedicated to our genuine ambitions and the future. But anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see all of you next time for another episode of TV Review. I hope to have some other episodes of some other goodies. So, thanks so much for joining with me, Matt Squirrel, and you guys have a great afternoon. Bye.
Matt Squirrel.